It's such an unlikely story when you think about it. How this little regional German automaker became completely associated with deadly terrorism. Yet, far from hurting BMW, this connection seemed to help define and strengthen their brand into the world's leading paragon of automotive cool. The members of the Baader-Meinhof gang of the early 1970s, they were definitely anachronisms. So they were deadly terrorists, to be sure. You know, they murdered and maimed dozens of Germans and Americans during their effort to kickstart global revolution. But they were also considered by an enormous part of the West German population to be cool, to be hip. And nothing was cooler and hipper than the car brand most associated with the Baader-Meinhof gang, which was BMW. Such was the supposed connection between the group and the cars that people began to joke that BMW didn't actually stand for Bavarian Motor Works, but instead it was shorthand for Baader-Meinhof Wagen. The Baader-Meinhof gang sprang into the West German public conscious in May of 1970 when a famous journalist named Ulrike Meinhof helped spring this convicted arsonist Andreas Baader from police custody in West Berlin. And over the next couple of decades, this proto-revolutionary army haunted all of Germany, leaving a trail of dead. But in many ways, it's the early years that are the most fascinating about the group, because far from being feared by all of Germany, this group managed to generate kind of an extraordinary amount of sympathy among at least part of the German population. So imagine it's 2001, and you ask Americans, do you feel sympathy towards Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda? Would you be willing to put up a member of Al-Qaeda in your home for the night? Because in 1971, these exact questions were asked of West Germans in a poll about the Baader-Meinhof gang. And 14% of them said, yeah, I support them. Or, yeah, I definitely would let them spend the night in my house, or at least I'd consider it. That is 8.5 million people out of a population of 60 million that said, yes, I would consider aiding a known terrorist if asked. How in the world could this group, whose mission was to bring down the German state through violent revolution, engender such an incredible level of support? Well, it helps to understand the zeitgeist of West Germany in the early 1970s. Marxist theory among students was not a theory, it was cold, concrete fact. They felt that West Germany was kind of in the stages of late capitalism, soon to be followed by revolution and then glorious, glorious socialism. The only real question was when and who was going to be the vanguard to lead that revolution. So when Andreas Baader, Ulrike Meinhof, and their compatriots began issuing communiques asserting that they were grabbing that mantle, many young Germans were all too ready to profess support. It almost felt like the realization of prophecy. But that's not the only reason why the group was considered cool and popular. Think about any culture. Who defines cool? It's the young people. And that was as true in 1970s West Germany as it is today. And the Baader-Meinhof group was all young people. Their famous Wanted poster from 1971 tells the story. Young men and women, attractive, balanced equally between the genders. These people were clearly progressive and not paternally oriented. At 34, Meinhof was the oldest, but all the other members were in their 20s, and some were barely out of their teens. Baader, he was the leading trendsetter. He rarely went anywhere without his signature Ray-Ban aviator sunglasses, his crushed velvet body-hugging slacks, or his tight silk shirts. There's no doubt about it, these terrorists were fashion icons. And Baader loved cars. Though he never got a driver's license, he fancied himself a terrific driver. In reality, he was not so much like a good driver, but a driver utterly without any rational fear. He regularly crashed cars, and miraculously, he kind of always escaped without injury. So how did the history of the Baader-Meinhof gang get so entwined with the history of BMW? Well, the group obviously had a pretty strong transportation need. They had dozens of members spread all across West Germany, and the only logical solution to their transportation needs was to steal cars, lots and lots of cars. And from 1970 to 1972, they literally stole hundreds of them. So the BKA, which was the national police force in charge of capturing the group, they're sort of like the German version of the FBI, they began to notice early on that the group had this preference for stealing BMWs. So they developed these portable kits for local police to use to help identify Baader-Meinhof fugitives. And the kits specifically noted that the group, quote, preferred faster cars, mostly BMWs, with false or stolen license plates. So with little else to go on, local police, they jumped on that information. They clearly wanted to help out, and this tiny little nugget of information was all the justification they needed. They began to see terrorists behind the wheel of every single BMW that drove past them. So it may have been the little 1500 model, or perhaps the 1600 model, both from the 60s, maybe even the 1800 model, even perhaps the powerful new 2800 CS. Probably not the Isetta, but definitely the bread and butter BMW, the BMW 2002. The news magazine Der Spiegel, which is kind of like the Time magazine of Germany, noted that during the Baader-Meinhof era, BMW drivers on German roads had an especially hard time because, quite simply, they were all under suspicion. And it's not quite clear who first coined the term Baader-Meinhof-Wagen, claiming that BMW was an acronym for it. But by late 1971, in the minds of the German state and ordinary Germans, it could not have been more apt. Ironically, the BMW wasn't even Andreas Baader's favorite car. That honor belonged to the Porsche 911. So Baader, he may have claimed that he was fighting for the working class, but his tastes were definitely bourgeoisie all the way. As to BMWs, it's possible they were chosen simply because they're easier to hotwire than other cars. We just don't know. But such was the perceived connection to BMW that police would set up roadblocks and they would simply pull over only BMWs. And more than once, terrorists in their stolen Alfa Romeos, Fiats, Mercedes, even Porsche 911s would drive by completely unmolested. Many Germans, especially BMW owners, they grew annoyed by this perceived presumption of guilt. And an enterprising company began to churn out kind of a churlish bumper sticker. It said in German, and this is the English translation, "I do not belong to the Baader-Meinhof group." And its message was both practical and anti-fascist. It was basically saying, just because I'm young and I have long hair, or even because I drive a BMW, it doesn't mean that you have the right to assume that I'm a terrorist. So even if BMWs weren't in fact Andreas Baader's actual favorite car, it's easy to see why they were so appealing to hip leftist terrorists. They are cool cars. They are appealing. In fact, I like them so much, I bought my own Baader-Meinhof Wagen, this Wagen.
Life's the same, I'm moving in stereo. Life's the same, except for my shoes. Life's the same, you're shaking like tremolo. Life's the same, it's all inside you. It's so easy to play up your breakdown. It's so easy to fly through a window.
It is a pretty great car. It's sporty, it's low to the ground, and it's really fast, at least for 1972 standards. It's roomy. In fact, I think it could probably fit 5 terrorists quite comfortably. You know, I could see why it was considered the official staff car of the Baader-Meinhof gang. So the car does have its quirks. There's no air conditioning, unless you consider this little corner window air conditioning. The turn signal, it's on the right-hand side of the column, which makes no sense. And for a car that is designed by Bavarians, built in Bavaria, it's unbelievable at how bad this car is in the snow and ice. It's kind of remarkable. But honestly, I love the car. It's sort of non-threatening in that I'm not trying to be better than you way. People respond really well to the car. When I'm driving on the freeway, I swear, every time I go on the freeway, somebody is going to honk their horn at me or give me a thumbs up or give me a wave and sort of acknowledge that they like my car. I've had people like follow me into parking lots to want to talk about the car. I had a guy follow me 5 miles to my home at night just so he could tell me that he liked my car. Honestly, it was really creepy, but it was kind of sweet in its own way. But, you know, I never forget about the connection of my car to this notorious murderous terrorist group, the Baader-Meinhof gang. So, in fact, I sport my own sticker on the side of my car that tells any cop that just because I'm driving a Baader-Meinhof wagon doesn't mean I'm a left-wing German terrorist from the 1970s. Probably no single incident cemented the connection between BMW and the Baader-Meinhof gang than what happened along a bridge near Hamburg on July 15, 1971. Police had set up a roadblock, and group members Werner Hoppe and Petra Schelm were traveling in their freshly stolen BMW 2002, and they quickly got boxed in on the nearby bridge. So they fled the car, exchanging gunfire with the police, and then ran off in different directions. Hoppe got trapped, and almost immediately he just gave himself up, but Schelm was shot dead after firing her gun at several police officers in a back alley. Later that day, the BMW was pulled up onto a flatbed truck and towed away, and that image of the BMW 2002 was seared into the minds of many Germans through repeated showings on the news in the coming weeks. So any love among portions of the German population for the Baader-Meinhof gang pretty much stopped dead in its tracks the following year in May of 1972. Because after 2 years of bank robberies, communiques, planning, scheming, they finally launched their war on Germany and America. So 2 bombs go off at the U.S. Army base in Frankfurt, killing an American lieutenant colonel and injuring dozens. 2 more bombs were left at the U.S. base in Heidelberg, which killed 3 soldiers. More bombs went off in printing plants and police stations, injuring and maiming dozens more. But Baader knew. He knew that he had 8.5 million Germans lined up to join his fight. But they never materialized. It turns out that this army of young Germans who had claimed so much admiration for the group, they were basing their support for an entirely theoretical revolution. Because when the bodies began piling up and that theory turned to practice, that support utterly disappeared. But what's most interesting is how BMW was absolutely unscathed by their connection with this notorious, dangerous terrorist faction. In fact, BMW was at the very beginnings of their transformation into the paragon of cool automotive design and excellence, kind of the Apple computer of the auto world. But they weren't always that way. Throughout the 50s and 60s, they were constantly on the brink of insolvency. They were a regional automaker. They had very little presence in the all-important US market, and they had kind of a reputation for staid, plain, if well-built cars. So is there a relationship between their evolving into the world's hippest car brand and their connection to the world's hippest and most dangerous terrorists? Well, that might be a stretch. We don't want to confuse correlation with causation, but when you think about it, it must have been a very exciting time to be working in the marketing department in BMW World Headquarters in Munich in the early 1970s, and to realize that your brand, separate from your efforts, had developed this previously unknown cachet, this coolness, even if that had arrived piggybacked on Germany's most violent post-war struggle.